a lot of brain power and ideas are just lost because we're not including everyone that should be included.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Carl J. Cox here. I'm the host of the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. This episode is brought to you by 40 Strategy. 40 Strategy is built to make strategy work for small to medium-sized business and organizations. And frankly, they work for large organizations as well. We do this by designing world-class strategic plans, but more importantly, help keeping them accountable to actually get it done. To learn more, go to 40strategy.com. You may have heard our book, Lost at CEO, has launched, and it's been an Amazon bestseller in 12 different categories. We encourage you to go out, learn about it, and it can help out with your strategic plan and execution. Find that on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Audible.com as well. Well, I'm very excited for our guest, Ian Peterman. We actually have swapped podcasts in this process, and I did a recording with him in our time yesterday. And Ian Peterman is leading the way for conscious design. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And through his book, podcast, and public appearance. Matter of fact, he is going to the U.S. Senate here soon, and we'll be talking about conscious design and the impact it has. And this is just like a one-day speech. This is like multiple days. I'm really excited for you to talk about that a little bit more. And he's going to talk more in detail about his firm, the parts around it. He has been working this for 15 years in product development, and Jessica has been also involved in 20 years as well. And they've got some incredible things in these 4 pillars that I'm not going to lead into today that you're going to talk about here very soon. But Ian, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be able to chat with you again.
And so I am really curious about today's session. So can you give deeper insights for those who are curious? What the heck does Peterman Design Firm do? Give some more discussion around that.
Yeah, so the firm is really built to be that partner to help, mostly hardware, but we work in software as well. That partner to go from, yes, there's an idea, there's a product, we want to launch a product, all the way through to really the product is out in the market, not just, produced and sitting in a warehouse somewhere, but really helping companies and even individuals launching their own companies get their product actually out there. I'm almost at 20 years of doing this now, so I think I'm going to change that in my bio now and get that updated. But I've done this for a really long time, and there's not very many companies that you can partner with the whole way through, and I've gone through the process enough times to see what can happen, some of the problems. And so that's why I built this firm, is to smooth out that process and be able to be a true partner with a brand and walk from day one all the way to you're making money, and actually be that partner, not just hire me to do one little part and then disappear and good luck with your idea. That's really the idea. And we focus on brands that really want to make a difference, that really want to improve the world. They are thinking about things like sustainability, and really build those brands up and help them be as successful as possible.
I think that's one of the reasons we have similar affinity towards what we're doing is we don't do the same thing at all, just to clarify, like our core. But what I mean by that is you don't just help them come up with a great idea for the brand. You help them execute the brand. And that's a hard thing, because you don't, it's just not one thing. You have to incorporate it through every single experience and every single thing you do. I don't know if you've ever been to demotivators.com, but it's a wonderful, sarcastic website. For example, you could order a glass that says the glass is half full. But what's really fun about it is you can go through this process. It does all these sarcastic things, and they'll say, well, we hope we disappointed you with your order. They continue it like through the entire process of making sure that you get this really funny, sarcastic experience. And so once again, shameless plug I get no benefit for demotivators.com, but enjoy that. But Ian, when you're focusing and working with somebody, tell us about these 4 steps, key pillars that you work with to help make sure that it works well.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is conscious design, and that is the design philosophy that has come out of doing this for decades now. And one of the things, I'll step a little bit back in kind of how this came about, because it it'll give some good context, is I was actually asked the question, what makes our process separate, right? There's lots of, you can design in so many different ways, there's so many different approaches. And so that really made me sit down and think, okay, well, how do I actually think through? Because, when you're doing stuff, and you're very aware of this in what you do, is you just do stuff. You're just going, right? And you don't always sit down and think, how am I actually thinking through this process? Or how am I even making decisions about what I'm doing? You just do it because you've been doing it. It's there. And so this really was a result of sitting down and thinking through. And my wife, Jessica, you mentioned, we work together a lot. And so I was like, all right, I'll actually think about, how do I design? How do I think through the process? What are those key things that we add in that people are missing? And so that's where this design philosophy came from. And so the 4 pillars: observation, impact, connection, and inclusion, it's a 4-step process. And it's been an interesting journey with it, because I wrote it down thinking the whole process. How do you sit down from idea to the end, right? Because I've worked in production, I've worked in sales, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in all these different areas, and realized how connected everything was. But putting this out here and really having people take a look at it, I've been surprised at how much just the first pillar, like, I've had people talk to me and go, I haven't even read the rest of it. We just realized that observation was so important and we weren't doing it right. We're just taking step 1. We'll get back to you. We want to talk to you later, but help us with observation. Help us really learn. And that's really the key piece, is really becoming aware, looking at it through my lenses, right, of developing a physical product. There is so much that goes into it, of your product is going to impact the lives of the people who make it. It's going to impact the economy of the country, city that it's being produced in. And we kind of became aware of how interconnected we are. We globalized, right? We have a supply chain across the world. It's there. It wasn't really in people's, maybe in the back of their head, maybe. And then COVID, we realized, oh, we get toilet paper not from here, right? When you have that, and then you get that really hard connection in your mind of, oh yeah, there is no such thing as like hyper local for everything. That's not our reality that we live in. Everything is connected internationally. Like toilet paper, it comes from all kinds of places, not probably next to your house. There's probably not a factory nearby. So people really started seeing that. And so when to put this book out right kind of in the middle of that. And so it was good timing. And so helping people really look at, okay, well, what are all the impacts that your product can have? And what are all the things that are going on with it? How do you turn those? And that's where like the impact, connection, and inclusion come into, is once you realize and really observe, you just, take a moment, look at what is all the impact you're going to do, decide what that is going to be. And you in your consulting talk about long-term planning. This is applying it on this product level. You have to think about, okay, well, yeah, you're going to end customer, great. You're designing it, but someone's going to go manufacture it. That's probably raw materials are coming from somewhere. How do you make that clean? How do you make that well maintained? How do you even guide that? Right? Or even just being aware that those decisions are making those impacts. And then how do you include people? How do you make the best connection and all of that process? But it really starts with understanding the impact. And I think a lot of companies, even especially startups, you're in startup mode and you don't think about whether you're having an impact. You're like, oh, I'm just a little company and I make socks. Like, well, you probably are impacting 100 people directly just by having some socks made. Like there's more impact that you have than you might think about. And so the idea of this is, I took my experience, I took how people really approach this, things like human-centered design and other ergonomics and things that people have been putting together, things I learned in college, right, that are popular, and really put it all together into a process so you can achieve all those things that you want to, and do it in a way that there's a system, there's an actual approach to thinking through that process. And so the way I describe it is it's a design process. It's a design thinking process. And you can apply, and I've talked to people that are looking at how to build smart cities, like from the ground up. And I've been approached by people in that space is how do we take your pillars and we apply it to building a city? How do we apply it? And that's with kind of a goal. Like when you launch something, you're like, oh, I'm just going to put it out there and see. And so it's been interesting to see how people have seen it and go, oh, I want to take this and apply it to a new area. The fashion world, I've spoken quite a few times in the fashion world. They really have liked what I'm doing. And then, what you mentioned, now we're speaking with a group, it's called the Nexus Council, that we're going to be in DC talking to Senate about circular economy, which is basically taking conscious design and applying it on a global scale. That's even bigger. There's a lot more thinking we're going to have to do for that, but that's in a medium nutshell, everything about that.
It is remarkable of how much, once again, everyone tends to, and I think it's okay to look at the negatives of COVID, right? But there were some really fascinating things that happened that opened people's eyes, right? Obviously, work from home is probably one of the most easiest ones. Here we are talking on Zoom, and prior to COVID, I used to use Zoom quite a bit. Most people did not, and so half of I felt like the first 5 or 10 minutes was you put the volume on there. Right? It was just
Click the
this
green
very,
button.
yes, the green button, hit the green button. Which green button? The green one, and so it was a super challenging thing just to get people online. And then turning on the video, that was a whole nother event, like you were lucky enough to like hear them, and then maybe they would actually turn on the video. Today, this is our grandparents are doing this. This is or 6-year-old kids are doing this. This is one of these aspects of technology that's been embraced. But you said something incredibly important of like, wow, the supply chain and the conflicts, right, that are different than they were today. The conflicts that we have now with China, as an example, right, and there's this massive movement of supply chain outside of China to Mexico, to India.
Yep.
Name your other countries. But then you go, well, is that even still okay? Right? If there's a conflict, if it's in India, can we still ship something to the US if there's a conflict in the sea, right? In the South China Sea, as an example. So being mindful, once again, of having conscious design of not just today, but 5, 10, 20, 15, 20 years from now. And you have to think that way because, like, trying to, for example, move over semiconductor chips from Taiwan to the United States is an extraordinary event. Right. I'm talking those small pieces that these different parts. It takes years. We're right by Intel here at where we're located. And those plants take a long time. $1 billion plants take a long time to build and put together. And that's just for one cycle of the product and all the tooling that goes into it and all the effort that goes into that and all the supply chain around that piece alone. It's extraordinary. So I want to keep on moving through your 4 parts a little bit and just what do you mean by inclusion? So that's like your 4th step and you have in there. What does that mean, from your perspective?
It can mean a few different things, but one of the main points that I try to drive with brands is there's a lot of most big companies, and you're familiar, there's love silos. They love to go, here's the engineering, here's the marketing, here's accounting, here's design, here's, everybody sits at a little cubicle over here or in their house still, but still with that same kind of mentality. And a lot of brain power and ideas are just lost because we're not including everyone that should be included. And so one of the big things is that, like I said, you might say, oh, I'm just a small product, like there's not very much, like what else, who would I include, right? That question. And one of the examples I give is Ticonderoga pencil. It takes 4 countries to produce this. This is cheap. It's been a standard. I don't know. I used it when I was a kid. My parents used it when they were in school. Like, it's been a long time. This takes multiple countries, multiple continents to put together. That's a lot of people. You're talking, right? You're like, oh, it's just a pencil. There's somebody who's making it. There's somebody who's shipping it, delivering it, boxing it, unboxing it. That's before it even gets to the store where somebody buys it, or whether it's online or in person. You still have that. We're not even there yet. And we're probably touched 100 people minimum on it. And so really thinking through and kind of tie into the 3rd step of connection is building those partnerships and understanding that if you talk to the person that makes the eraser and you talk to the person that makes the lead, you might have some better ideas than what you have come up with because you're not the person. It's unlikely that you're the person that sat there for 30 years making erasers, right? So why not include that brain power and go, hey, you've been doing this possibly longer than I've been alive. Why don't you tell me what is good and what is not good? How can we make this better? It makes everything more efficient, really, when you start to pull in those expertise that quite often gets ignored, especially in big siloed companies. And so that's something I really try to. I do consulting to help companies build, design more consciously. And that's one of the things that I really point out is like, you have a much larger team than you think if you really consider all the partners that you're connected to that make your product possible. If you just tap on it, like most people are very happy to tell you ideas. Like I've seen huge changes inside of companies where all they did was sit down and go, let's just ask all the people on the manufacturing floor what they're doing and what they hate and what makes their day hard and slows, because at the end of the day, they want an easier job. They're going to help you increase production. They're going to make it easier, cheaper, better. Like you're making their lives better and yours at the same time. And they're not going to not tell you how to make their job better. It's very a win-win. And so really making sure that you think, because when you actually think about what your true impact is, then you can understand who all is really involved and include all of them in some level of at least getting some feedback, right? And you don't want to have everybody making all the decisions all the time. That can get messy, but getting input from everybody that's in the process can yield a much better process in the end.
I wholly agree with what you just said there, because we've realized in strategic planning, when you just work in that boardroom, for lack of a better term, or the retreat, and you only have the senior team that's together. And I would say the vast majority of strategic retreats happen. That's what it is. It's just the top team. And so they'll come up with all their wonderful ideas of how they're going to change the world with their products and services, right? And it's super exciting. Like retreats are fun. Problem is, if they don't have a plan to incorporate how they're going to get there, if they don't incorporate the team to figure out that how, they're going to reject it. They're not going to buy into it. They're going to, matter of fact, 51% of managers, Gallup says, actively try to sabotage your plans. They will not make sure it gets done. So how you help prevent that, right, is you get them incorporated in the process. And so you're not done that retreat. You go further, you spend the extra time, and it's that classic, you spend more time planning or spend more time sharpening the saw. It's a lot easier to cut down that tree. And so that's what we should do. That's why I love what you're talking about here is, when you get a holistic approach and you get input from, even for lack of a better term, to the ground floor, the people who are building the product, right? Or like shipping the product out, they can give you amazing ideas that you may not have no idea as you're working with customers or trying to, you're trying to grow your company or hire employees, et cetera. That insights can be valuable from two things. One's helping out the process, but more importantly, getting them to actually do the process down the road.
Yeah, and one of the things too, and I forget where I saw this, but I believe it's AWS, so Amazon's platform, which makes up a large percent of their profit right now. That was an idea because, and people will say good and bad things about Amazon, but for this particular part, I don't think we can argue that it's bad. They have an open policy of, if you have an idea, you get to pitch it. They have a much more open door for some of that. And this was an engineer came up with the idea and said, we need this, was given the resources, built it up, and now it's a large percentage of Amazon's revenue. They would never have, if they hadn't had a policy and a way, right? A way for that information for somebody that usually is, considered the grunts. It's the ground floor. It's like, oh, it's just the worker bees, but they actually listen. All right, I'm sure there's crazy ideas that come across, and you'll get those nuggets where it's like, oh no, that's a key piece this is worth a lot of money. But hopefully that guy got a really nice bonus for coming up with AWS. But that kind of innovation can happen when you really build into, and that's the inclusion part, is go, yes, you're sitting there working. You know what we need because you're the one needing it every single day that you're doing your job.
Yeah. I love how, once again, how you incorporate thinking about and how to get everybody involved in that process to get to a better end result. Right. Which is ultimately the goal. And once again, it typically doesn't come from just the few people at the top. And that AWS example was how true that is. And once again, the same Intel plant that I said that's right nearby us, there are multiple buildings that are competing companies that are just storing computers. And of course, a lot of that is AWS servers, that is going in. But what has happened? It wasn't that long ago that we couldn't get a business up if we couldn't get a server up, right? So a lot of the
Right.
value was that IT management. That's almost gone now. Through AWS and other their competitors, we now can get up online an online business so much easier than we could have in the past. And that has been that, talk about accelerating change, right? So it not only was a huge benefit to AWS and their profits, but it also was a massive benefit to small, medium, and even large businesses. I mean, you have large I don't know exactly right now if Salesforce does, but I mean, some of the largest companies in the world are using AWS for
Yes.
their platforms because it's more effective, it's more beneficial to them than having a bunch of servers in their own buildings, be able to modify. So that's a great example there. So I'm kind of curious, and I know this is hard to say, is looking ahead to something and I love once again you meeting with the US Senate. What do you anticipate is going to be some of the things that they're going to be grappling with the most?
We've actually been talking to some people and getting some feedback on what is interesting about it. And one of the things that we're starting to see and really want to help build that people are recognizing is because we know that there's this global economy, right? We don't live in a bubble. And that bubble was burst. We weren't anyway, but we imagined it, right? And one of the things that we're looking at having as a primary topic during this is how do you globally manage efficiency, right? How do you, because right now, if you look at what happened with COVID, we realized how horribly inefficient our global supply chain is, right? It's not even necessarily have to do with whether it was coming from China or not. I was living in LA at the time, and there were ships so far out of Long Beach, you could see them from Santa Monica
I
in the
remember.
ocean waiting to go in. And that's everyone. Those are ships from India, all of Southeast Asia, China, you name it. Like that's one of the major ports on the West Coast, period, in North America, right? There's not very many other really big ones. So if it's backed up, that means all the other ones are backed up too. There are no backups. And so that just means that there's an inefficient global system. And one of the things that people are paying attention to is like high conflict materials that are acquired from areas that have high conflict rate. And so that's something that we're looking at and in what we can do in terms of a circular economy isn't just, people like to focus on, oh, it's circular, it's really small, like, oh, in my town we do this, which is great. But if you can create global circular economy, that is where efficiency really comes into play. And so that's one of the topics that we're playing with. And ideally that gets some more traction because it will benefit, obviously the US will benefit, but everyone else benefits too by having a more efficient global system. Because it's one of those, like, we've just organically created, like, no one has sat down and gone, we have a planet, how do we make the whole thing more efficient? Which is hard. Like that's a really big ask to do, but it would really help us if we did something like that. And so seeing how we can really improve or pilot programs, even if it's inside of the US, we're a large enough country, square mileage wise, we can test out some really long distance things and then start to get some global interest. In places like Europe, we're planning on doing some speaking in Europe because Europe itself is very interested in circular economy. They're actually more kind of ahead right now in what they're thinking of that. And so we're also trying to bring some of that and go, hey, Europe's really looking at this. Let's bring the US up a little bit more. Let's not be behind on that. And how can we position the US, because we're talking to the US Senate, right? Their top priority is the US. And how can we bring the US up a little bit more on a global level so that we're not lagging behind Europe on these ideas?
Yeah, it is interesting you think of so much of businesses, entrepreneurs, great ideas, right? That turn into larger business and larger businesses. And then they're doing it often through their just own efficiency, their personal efficiency, not necessarily as you said, a broader efficiency. How can this be done more thoughtfully? And there'll be some really interesting insights and then also probably risk and concerns around that, right? And then you can just imagine, well, we see it. Let's just do example. We have a billions, right? Or I maybe don't have the right number there, but hundreds of millions that are going into solar, basically renewable resource type energy right now. And so it's a battle, right, to get that money. People are doing everything they
Yeah,
can.
it is.
There's a massive backup to get solar panels on people's roofs right now if they didn't already have do in the past because the money's available, right? But then you have this interesting challenge. So what happens when it goes away, which has happened before? Once again, there was a big panel company that was down the road that was based in Germany that had a plant down here. And as soon as those stimulus monies went away, it went away. And so how do you create a way where it's this properly planned, but also, for lack of a better term, sustainably funded? Because otherwise, these boom bubbles we create through stimulus end up going away. And that's, of course, what we just experienced with the toilet paper and everything and all those ships. I remember, by the way, flying over Long Beach multiple times because I had some business down there. I remember counting over 50 ships waiting outside in the water. I mean, it was crazy. This is not just on docks. They were just outside and it seemed endless. It was almost back to back to back. It's incredible. Okay, so we're nearing the end here. And so let's talk about a few key things in success. How do you measure success in your business?
With the firm, it's really client based because we're a service. So for us, success is primarily measured by whether we were able to deliver what we wanted to the client and how successful the client has been from the work that we do. And so we love it. We have clients that have launched $1 million Kickstarters, and we have clients that have been able to secure millions in funding, right? And we consider that's really our success metric. Is we're going to do work for you. What are we able to help that client, that brand do with our help? Internally, we always look at profit. Everybody looks at it. We've talked about that, but that usually increases the better we do for our clients, the more that's going to do well. And we also really measure it by referrals. So we don't really do ads. We don't have a lot of outbound marketing, so to speak. Most of it is referral based, and as long as we keep getting those, we consider it a win, right? We're doing well. People are happy to refer business to us, which is great. We have amazing referral partners, and we don't really pay for that. So it's all based on they got to really like us and trust us to bring those businesses and brands to us that we can help. Those are our metrics, and we can, on each project we have different metrics, right? And it narrows down depending on each client and really their setting. But overall, as a business, those are the metrics we use.
Habits. You're a busy person. You got a lot going on, author, and got a podcast and growing business, get to speak to the Senate, and a bunch of cool stuff you have going on. What type of habits are you doing on a consistent basis so you can perform at your best?
It varies a little bit, but I'd say the most set ones that I have is I take time to be with my family. I have 5 kids. I spend time with them. I take weekends off as much as I possibly can, be able to reset. And I've owned my own business and done consulting enough before. I used to spend 80, 90 hours a week working, and that is not sustainable in the end. And so I'd say the biggest thing is just I let myself have some time at least once a week. If I have to, I'll do some weekend work. But when our last daughter was born, I decided that I was going to stop all of my crazy work hours and give myself weekends. And I think that's been other things, working out and meditation, mindfulness. Those are all really great, but my days vary so much that sometimes I have time, sometimes I don't. And so, but what I've done is I've really focused all my time to Monday through Thursday is my primary thing. I know we're recording on a Friday, but this is my only thing I'm doing today. So I try to keep a almost 3-day weekend. And then, if a client really needs me, they're paying me, I'll show up on a Friday. Like I'll do it, no problem. Or I love being on podcasts, so I'm happy to do this on a Friday, but it gives me that ability to actually have some time. And I found that it really, you can get everything done in 4 days, really. And if you trim it down and you just tell people you're not available, and then occasionally you are, but nobody expects it, it works. It took some adjustment, I have to say, from going from 80, 90 hours to doing a 4-day work week. My wife definitely helped remind me, because I would just by habit, right? It just became a habit to do 90 hours a week. So it was like, oh no, you said that you were going to not work on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Like you got to retrain yourself a lot. But I'm a lot more sane now. So it's all good.
Good for you. Truly, one of the greatest challenges, right, of being an entrepreneur is there's no end, right, to improving your business, and there's no end to making things better and just setting boundaries. You have a family, and I know it sounds like you got a wonderful wife, like I do as well, who reminds me, hey, really, just because you like writing your blog on a Saturday morning doesn't mean it's the best idea. So,
Yes.
yeah, it's in. So that it is interesting, to do that. So good for you for finding that. How do you measure success now in your personal life?
I mean, really, I don't have any set metrics, but it's for me, as long as my kids are happy, my wife's happy, and I'm not working all the time. That's winning. I don't miss games, I don't miss events with my kids. I'm able to do that. And as long as I can do that, I'd say I'm being successful, and I enjoy what I do. I don't have any desire, like I think you and I were talking about yesterday. I have no desire to work as an employee for someone. I'll do consulting, I'll do all that, but it's always on my own hours and my own time. And that keeps everything good on my end.
Well, good for you. I think that I appreciate you talking about the relationship, a happy, as they say, happy wife, happy life. And then, and to be present, that's one of the things I'm so grateful for is I've sacrificed a lot from a financial perspective so I could be present. Like last night, we had a senior night for one of our kids, soccer. We travel around, see our kids play sports around the country. That is something that having that flexibility to be able to do that, because I knew if I was in a different role, matter of fact, the reason why I arrived here, as I was talking to, I believe yesterday, is because I had to make that choice of do I want to travel globally 80% of the time or miss out on my family. And so I think that's good for you for making. I'm not saying, by the way, there's a right or wrong, but for me, I'm grateful for what we've done, and I'm glad you've been able to make that decision for yourself, because it's not easy, especially when there's so much opportunity, to make things better. Finally, not your own book, of course, which we would do recommend, Conscious Design, but what is a book that has inspired you that you'd like to share with others?
So I'm gonna plug a buddy of mine. I got the privilege of doing some pre-reading and review of it, and it's selling with authentic persuasion. And so it's really about how, because I hate icky salespeople. I cannot do used car salesman job. It's not how I run my company. And reading his book, his name is Jason Cutter. It was great to read through it and see somebody else from the sales world was also very much, you got to be authentic, because that's actually one of the things when you apply, because I applied conscious design to branding. And when you do that, one of the things that comes out is you got to be authentic. You got to be you. And so I think there's a lot of people are really easy to talk about that in branding, like be authentic, be you. And then they go and then hire the crazy salesperson so you actually sell. And they kind of disassociate those two. And so I point people, I go, no, you can actually sell without going that way. You can still be really authentic. He's a great guy, does a lot of consulting, helps sales teams, but his book is great. Highly recommend it every time I can.
Ian, great, and I hopefully you can connect me and him so he could potentially be on this podcast. So that sounds like a great
Absolutely.
potential suggestion for somebody. So Ian, how can people connect and learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. It's Ian Peterman. IDSA is on there as well. You can find us at Peterman Firm on pretty much any social media, and then petermanfirm.com. You can find us, contact through website is usually the best way to get a hold of me or my team, whether you're interested in pretty much anything. Want to talk to me about conscious design or do some actual work or designing, whatever it is, go through the website. My team's great at making sure I get all the right messages. So those are the best ways.
Well, Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest today on the Measure Success podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. To everyone else who's listening, we are thankful for you. I hope you have enjoyed this. I encourage you to go out and buy Conscious Design and also see what they're doing, to understand. I think it's really incredible, the impact, whenever you get asked to speak in front of the Senate, that means you're really making some incredible impact, and congratulations to you. But more importantly, we hope what it really does is make an extraordinary impact on this thinking. So as we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.